Good evening, everyone. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpwood Queen, and I'm reporting live from my little cabin in the woods, Murphy's Law. And we are here tonight with Valerie Nieman, and she has the book In the Lonely Backwater. This is quite a psychological book that will have you on the edge of your seat. But before we even begin with talking about the book tonight, I want to talk about what all Valerie has done. And I'm reading this right off the back of your book, so I hope this is all correct. Okay. Val has been a newspaper reporter, a farmer, a sailor, a teacher, and always a walker. I love that. She is the author of To the Bones and 3 earlier novels. Her work has been published widely here and abroad and collected into 3 books of poetry and 1 of short fiction. She has held state and NEA creative writing fellowships, and I just announced tonight that the name escapes me of her poetry book. I've been reading so many books, but I'm adding her poetry book, the one with the
leopard lady
on the front. That cover is fantastic because I don't know if I would have picked it up if I hadn't have you handed it to me, but I would have read it. But I really enjoyed it. So it's going to be on our list. And it looks like we've got, hang on just a second. We've got Jeffrey Dale Lofton coming in, and it looks like Janet Oakley is coming in. So here we go. But I want you to tell us a little bit about how in the world did you fall into this profession of being an author and a writer? Because most of the people on here are also authors and writers or in the book business, and everybody wants to know about the process. And I mean, tell us about from the time you were little to where you started your very first book.
Well, I grew up out in the country in Western New York State, and my parents always made sure I had books from the library. I used to beg them for little golden books when I was a little girl. It's like every time I went to the store, can I have a little golden book? And somehow they always scratched up some money. So I loved reading. I read everything I could get my hands on. And my first real writing, I can say was in 6th grade when I had an incredible teacher, Urban Milks, and he had us do a literary magazine. Of course, it was just like stapled in between, like, but
that's fantastic.
So we wrote poems and we wrote stories all around the theme of Christmas so we could give it to our parents as a gift. And my poem was the title poem for the collection, and I was hooked. It was all. Then I wanted to be a writer. And so, but I didn't know how to be a writer because I was just a country kid and everybody was either a factory worker or a farmer that I knew, everybody, and except for the teachers.
Yeah.
So I came to the conclusion that if I became a newspaper reporter, I could write like Hemingway.
Yeah.
Right. Well, when you're a kid from the country, you kind of make these weird connections. And so I went to journalism school and worked as a newspaper reporter, and I was writing all at the same time. So newspaper reporting put food on the table, but it also gave me lots and lots of material. I can hear somebody.
Somebody's probably got their phone on at the same time as their screen, and it tends to magnify. So if you have your phone on, turn it off so we won't get some feedback here. Thank you. Okay.
Could be me. I've got my phone.
I was looking at mine. Mine's off.
Okay. Yeah, I just, got all this wonderful material being a reporter that I've used in all my books. In the Lonely Backwater, the detective in here is really based on a detective that I knew and worked with as a police reporter. I mean, I changed a lot of stuff, but kind of the essential guy. Drexelban is this that kind of a patient, good, sensitive detective, not one of those flashy, run around with their guns drawn. So, yeah, I was really happy to do that because being a newspaper reporter gave me insight into all sorts of wonderful lives.
And it also creates discipline because you always have these deadlines. And
Yeah.
so what did they start you out working on the newspaper?
Police beat. You always start on the police beat, just about always. And I liked it. I mean, you want to talk about drama. I mean, you've got murders, you've got chases, you've got family drama, you've got all of this stuff. And so I liked being a police reporter. I also covered business, I covered the environment, I covered city council, I covered the courts, I covered little newspapers, you do everything. And so I did. And it was all just grist for the mill.
Well, I've had a lot of authors. In fact, one of my mentors, Jan Reed, started out as a newspaper reporter here in East Texas and went on to write for Texas Monthly. And he's kind of like the nonfiction version of Larry McMurtry. Oh, his books are wonderful. And he even wrote an autobiography called Close Calls. He was shot on an assignment of covering a Mexican boxer in Mexico City. His taxi was hijacked, and it's a long story. But anyway, newspaper writing is fascinating. I've actually done columns myself, but you have to be very disciplined because you've really got to get that story out quick.
And there's no excuse. They've got a hole on the front page. You have to fill it. You have no choice. And so I agree. I think it was great training. It taught me, even when you don't feel like writing, you can write and you can make it happen.
Do you believe in writer's block at all?
Knock wood, I don't, because usually I'm working on more than one thing, a novel and poems. And so it's like, okay, I'm not getting anywhere here today, but I can always do research, or I can go work on a poem, or so I kind of just, float. But I will say, though, I have to be honest, during COVID, I couldn't write. I couldn't.
I've heard that over and over and over.
Couldn't do it. I wrote some poems. I wrote a couple short stories, but a novel, I couldn't hold my mind there to do it.
I'm sure there's going to be some studies on this, because the biggest problem they're finding right now is, as we're coming out of it, and people are still getting it though, by the way, is that we're finding that there's some mental challenges. When I went to the checkup, my doctor said, well, how are you doing during COVID? And I go, okay. She goes, are you depressed? I don't think so. And I said, what are signs of depression? She goes, do you ever cry? Oh, I cry myself to sleep every night. She goes, Kathy, that's not normal. I go, but I'm not sad. I just cry every night when I go to bed. And I think it's the isolation. You've heard stories about people in the Wild West days that lived in these very isolated, areas that the women would go crazy, or, from the isolation, and when the men were gone tending cattle or whatever. But it's fascinating. Now, were you quiet as a child, Val? Were you a talker?
I was quiet. I was an only child until my sister came along, when I was 7. So I was used to being a reader and out in the woods wandering around like Maggie. That's what I did. And so, what made me a talker, and now you would not believe that I'm not a talker, is because I went to journalism school, and that kind of forced you. It's like, you have to interview people. You have to. And that broke me out of that kind of quietness.
Yeah, I do believe that's true. Now, on the writing process, do you have the same time you write every day?
Oh, no. I learned to work in bits and pieces. So I write, I think, best in the morning. I like to get up and work in the morning. And I am worthless after, like 8 o'clock at night. I'm just, not working.
I am the same way, mostly because it's so hot right now. But okay, when you were writing this book, there's going to be a lot of people on the YouTube channel that haven't read it. And there's some here tonight that haven't read it either. It's a wonderful story. It's really, I enjoyed it thoroughly, and enjoyed meeting you now, because it just kind of helps lend more to where the story comes from. But if you were to describe this book to someone, what would you say?
It is a coming of age murder mystery set in the South.
Boy, that's pretty good, because it's hard to do those short synopsis things, but you've got to learn how to do that, because sometimes you just don't have to. You have as much time as you want tonight to talk about this, but what made you go for that kind of psychological thriller element of it? Was there something, were there mysteries in your hometowns, or things you couldn't figure out, or what got you intrigued with that genre?
Well, the way the book came together, and it's really strange, I had some notes for different kinds of books.
Yeah.
Sort of had one about sailing, because I'd been
Yeah.
sailing on this big lake on the North Carolina-Virginia border. Then I had some notes about a young woman botanist out in the woods. So it's kind of like that was there, but there wasn't anything making him go. And then I found, and I was moving a few times, I found a high school yearbook. And,
Oh, yeah.
and in it,
I remember
one
this.
of my classmates had written an inscription about, to the effect of, I hope we can get past this argument someday. And then she signed it love. And I'm thinking, what did we argue about that was big enough to put in the
Probably
yearbook?
nothing. Probably nothing. Did you find out?
Probably nothing. But that balance between the argument and love made me wonder, what happened? And that just got my brain cooking. And the other elements kind of came together with the young woman in the woods and the sailing and this weird thing. And I started thinking about high school and how everything is just really over dramatic. Everything
Yeah.
is so intense. Everything is end of the world. And
It
so,
is.
yeah. And so I don't know how I decided that Charisse was going to die, but Charisse had to die. And then I had to figure out why and what happened. And like always, I kind of feel my way through the book following the characters. I don't really start with an outline.
Yeah, okay. I'm the same way. I have I usually have an idea at the beginning and the middle and the end. And then it's like the characters take over when you start.
Yep, yep, yep.
And are they still talking to you from this book?
At one point I thought I might do a follow-up, take Maggie a little older, because I really like her and Drexel Van. I would love to bring them back. And I would love for her mother to show back up, who abandoned her. So it kind of is there. But in the meantime, other things have happened. And one thing is that I had a big passion project I've been working on for 30 years. I never thought I was going to place it, because it's a historical, it's set in a period that's not a popular period. And I really worked a lot of research to make it really accurate, rather than being just kind of, oh, there's a castle. I
Yeah.
really, it's set in Scotland. I went to Scotland. I spent.
Oh, you're going to have a everybody loves books set in Scotland.
Well, I went and then I walked with my backpack all the way across the country. And
Oh my gosh.
I walked on the coast. I went up to Orkney. I went to Iona, and just wanted to kind of suck in, what do the rocks look like? What does this, stream look like? What is the coast like? What are, all of that stuff. I wanted to feel like, I knew something of the country. And so that was wonderful. I really loved being there, and had just great adventures, met wonderful people. And I'm hoping to go back probably next year, because that book sold. It's a 2-book series, and I got to write the second book.
Oh, great. That's great, because I know everybody I've ever known that's gone there, including my daughter. She says it's just magical. It's just beautiful. It's wonderful. And, what was your favorite thing that you did there?
Oh, wow.
The pubs? A lot of people like the pubs.
Well, I walked solo across everywhere. I was walking solo. And so the Great Glen Way takes you from the West Coast to the East Coast,
Right.
along that rift in the center by Loch Ness and all those lochs. And that was amazing, just to be out there. And you would look and you'd see nothing for as far as you could see. And you hardly met anybody on the trail. So that was pretty cool. That really, was a challenge. And I loved Iona, which just has one of those thin places. It just makes you feel like, the space between worlds is very close here.
Oh, wow.
I went up to Orkney, and on the main island, there's a road that goes from one side to the other, and it's all prehistoric stuff. So you've got Maze Howe, Ring of Brodgar, uh, Stones of Stennis. So there's like 6 sites, and then you end up at Skara Brae, which is like this buried village. And that was amazing. That was amazing to see all of that ancient history.
Now, did you camp on this trip, or did you stay in little inns, or what did you do?
I stayed in little inns and B&Bs and hotels. I kind of, after the first week, didn't have reservations. I just would get my little tablet out, and I'd get on there and look for something in the next town. And I always found something. Stayed in some interesting places.
What time of year did you go?
Early May, soon as
Okay.
school was out, so like the 12th or 15th of May. It was still a lot of snow up on top of Ben Nevis. It was chilly, but beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of snow in Colorado right now too. I
Yeah.
can't believe it, but as hot as it is here. That's fascinating. Have you been to other countries where you've written about, or is that?
Ireland and
Oh, yeah.
and France. Only a couple poems from France, sadly. No book, but a couple 3 poems.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to travel, but reading is like kind of the spark that gets you excited about going there. But you went there before you wrote the book, right? On to Scotland.
Well, I'd been working on it for 30 years, and
Oh, okay.
I didn't think, honestly, it was going to get picked up, because it's just, I think the closest thing would be like Wolf Hall. I really wanted to dig into the politics and religion rather than being romantic. So it's dealing with it's set in around 1000 to 150 AD, and it deals with the Macbeth story, which is,
Oh my gosh, you're really talking historical fiction.
yeah,
Wow.
he was
And is it finished? Is it finished?
the first book is finished. The second one is not.
Have
Because
you got it published yet?
Regal House is going to put it out in 2025. So
All right. Well, make sure I get a copy of that because I definitely want to read it. It would be fun, and maybe it'll get a lot of people going to Scotland. So you've written how many poetry books?
3
Three.
poetry books.
And you've got how many books?
Wow, isn't that awful?
That's
One,
great. If you can't remember it, it's a lot.
5 novels and a book of short stories. So
You see, this was the first book that came into my view. And I always, if I can have time, if I can get through all these stacks of books that are just all around me right now, I like to go back and read. I've been reading Pamela Benning Ewing's past books, because usually if I like the first book, I like to see the trajectory of where people started and where they're going. And publishers used to invest in that, and it's not so much now anymore. If you're just not out of the chute, a surefire winner with 100,000 books, you're not going to be back. But I really feel like that's why I love the Pulpwood Queens, because we invest in our authors. We want to see what all they're doing, and I love promoting them. Now, tell me, since you're a sailor, was the cover your idea and everything?
Regal House is wonderful. They're one of those fantastic small presses that really supports their writers. And, it's not one of the biggies in New York, but you get that personal relationship with your editor and the cover designer, who came up with a cover I really didn't like. And I was really honest. I said I would never pick up this book. And so she went back and worked, and we came up with this one. And I was happy with it, because it's got that gloomy Gothic kind of ominous look to it.
Well, it goes with the title. It makes
Yeah.
sense to me, and it draws you in because you think, what's going on this, sailboat? So, yeah, I really think, I'm doing covers now, so I really have always paid attention to covers, and I'm surprised at how many of it get it so wrong. I mean, one of my authors wrote a book set in Texas, and on the front of it was English garden flowers. And
Oh,
I thought, no, very stylized garden. And I go, this is very British, and we're in Texas. Everything here is more, it's just a totally different
yeah.
thing. Azaleas and magnolias, it's just not like that. So, but I do think this is great. And I like that you're the spot of color on the back, because you've got the color with the pop. That's very smart, because it really draws your attention to your look, and it's very nicely done. Regal House, everybody, if you're looking for a small publisher, we'll all have to check it out, because it's getting harder and harder now to get into the big guys, unless you're a celebrity, sports figure, a political figure that has a mega following. It's really, really hard to get published. So I'm going to open it up to, we've got a lot of people here tonight, and I want to open it up so people can make comments or have questions or for you. So who wants to begin? Does somebody have something they would like to ask or say?
I have a question.
Yay. Thank you, Jeffrey. That
Yeah.
was the prettiest picture. I know I called you Dale Darling, but that was a beautiful picture you did. I was so happy you did that. Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was very sweet.
It was. Yeah.
So Val, I'm really interested. It's not just a straight narrative. There are letters in the book. There's a script in the book. It's broken up with different forms of writing. There's an email, a text string. Can you tell us about why you chose to include those ways of communicating, why the characters did that, and what you wanted to show with that?
Well, it's first person, and it seemed to me it was getting a bit claustrophobic in Maggie's head. And so I thought, well, I'd like to have some viewpoints other than hers. And I started with the father's letters, because, it just made sense. He's out of his mind over his wife leaving him. And so he writes her these horrible, painful letters that he either doesn't send or they come back. And so she's, of course, curious. She reads them. So we get access to the father through that. And then other things just came up. I used to work in a newspaper, so I have a cheesy newspaper editorial in there, how we need to catch these murderer and everything, and the kind of things you overhear sitting in a restaurant or something. You hear people talking, and so Maggie's listening all the time. She's hearing these people talking. I don't know, it just came up that I thought I wanted to have these other insights without having another viewpoint character. And so it might have been a little strange. I don't know. Somebody said it's experimental. I didn't think it was that experimental, but
I thought it was really brilliant, and it was interesting. And I don't think I've seen it in quite this way, but I really enjoyed it. And so I was curious to know why you did it, and what made you think to do it. What brought you to that?
well, I think that idea of Maggie's really intense, and you almost need a little bit of a breather, because she is like, and maybe we need to get just a little bit of distance from her now and again. And so, yeah, started with the father's letters, but the other things kind of cropped up unexpectedly, because I didn't have them planned, but there they were.
I enjoyed that.
It's very clever, because it kind of gives you something exciting. You know how sometimes when I put little boxes in my book, and it just gives you just kind of a little eye candy break if you want to stop for a minute or you're coming back. So it was very clever. Anybody else want to say a comment or question?
Hi,
Hi.
are you?
I'm Janet. So
Yeah.
I write historical fiction. So I know the idea of research and actually going to a place, but you said you didn't use plot lines. I don't plot either, but you're talking about a really ancient time. But mine, I can at least follow historic events, and that my characters in that era, he's dealing with, or she, whoever they are, is dealing with what's happening in their time. So I often use an event that they're working toward, or I know in a particular thing I'm writing out now that I have beats. I call them my beats because this happened on February 5th, and this can affect the whole thing. So how'd you work out your ancient one? How'd you figure out how that one worked?
Well, I came onto the story while doing research for a different novel, and it just kept in my head. I just kept, it was bugging me. You know how it is, how things just kind of, scratch at you until you deal with them. And so I started doing research, and this was before the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Really, I was getting books from the library. I was getting interlibrary loan. I was reading these dusty old tomes. But what we know of the period, there are chronicles. There are, some historical events. And so, once I laid those in as a framework, but even in that, they're not sure when people were born. They're not sure if this is the same person as that person. It's kind of fragmentary. So I have the big events. I know when kings changed, when people were killed, but I had to make up the rest of it. The relationships between people and the friendships and antipathies and how they were raised and who taught these two children. And so I just had to make all that up. And so I was trying to be accurate to the time period and to the cultures. But yeah, it's I say it's speculative because we don't know a lot. And so I chose that in the case of the woman who becomes Macbeth's wife, to work with her as someone who was raised in one of the ancient religious traditions of the Picts. And so she brings that into a Christian realm. And so difficulties ensue, as you can imagine.
And I love how you went to Orkney. I was on Shetland for a whole week, and I went there for Shetland Noir for crime writing. I love what they said. We were the nicest people that ever come to this art center, but we were all killing people in one form or the other. But anyway, I went there for the World War II history, but I also was surprised to learn that they have Neolithic structures too down by the airport, as well as Viking, because it was a Viking colony. And I found that really interesting. I didn't know about the Neolithic stuff, and that's about 4,000 years old. So it's very interesting.
It's really, it just goes right through you when you're inside some of these things like Skara Brae, where there was this whole town built with stone. It sounds like the Flintstones, but it seems like it was actually rather comfortable because it was far in the north. And so they built into the ground and they built with stone. And then inside they had, they had little dressers built. You had no trees up there. So you had these little dressers with shelves. So they must have had enough worldly goods that they wanted to display them. And for me, that just kind of like, they're just like us. They got their little knickknacks and they would put them on their shelves. I don't know, that just touched me for some reason.
Yeah, you see how we think that we have all this stuff, but they have their own form of technology. The stones that were there as Schomburg was, I forget what it's called now, but Sharshelf or something like that. But it's the stonework was amazing, and how they cut it. They only have stone tools; they don't have anything metal. Amazing.
Yeah, and
I can't wait to read it. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I've jumped all over the place. I started out with post-apocalyptic science fiction. Then I wrote a realistic Rust Belt novel. Then I wrote a Southern crime novel. Then I wrote a horror eco-justice novel. And then I wrote Backwater. And so I am an agent's nightmare, a publisher's nightmare. And now I'm doing historical, which is entirely new for me. And so I really would, I need advice from writers like you who work in historical, like, okay, how do I reach readers in this whole new territory I've gone off into?
I think it's kind of fascinating that you are going outside the box, because I think authors can tell many stories. And, you see authors go from memoir to book to children's book. I don't like to be put into a box. And so I think good for you. I think you're just going to build your own following just by writing great stories. And that's what it should be. Don't you guys think? Comments?
I think everybody, I know all of us in North Carolina just want another vow book. It's like
Yay!
we trust whatever you write. It's great.
I wish I
See,
had
there
one
you
that
go.
was startling as yours, because
Uh-huh.
yours just jumps out and grabs people. I mean, I love it. It's beautiful, but man, that emu face just like, ah!
You're very kind. You're very kind. But Val, how do you, so being in Scotland and capturing that ancient language, was that hard?
Language is an interesting thing because, of course, I'm not writing in Gaelic, and you don't want it to sound,
Yeah.
phony and, ye oldie kind of stuff. You don't want to do that.
Well, that's like writing Southern. You don't want it to sound corny, or you
Yeah.
want to give a little flavor, but you
Or
don't want
caricature.
it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I used some of a few Gaelic words, especially for names of places and things like that, but mostly kind of what I call just plain speaking, just
Yeah.
kind of straightforward without anything that feels contemporary, watching out for contemporary kind of things that would sound really strange, but just kind of very plain. And again, Hilary Mantel, I think in Wolf Hall,
Mhm.
it's straightforward dialogue, but then it'll have a turn of phrase or a reference in some way that makes it feel like of the period, but not so that it feels antique or strange.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to pull off. So, I don't know. At least she was able to work with people who were speaking English. So,
And in all your books, like capturing that character voice and that personality and who the character is, how do you do that? How do you how do you get into the heads of these people?
probably the same way you do. They're in your head. They're walking around up there talking, and sometimes I want them to do things that they don't want to do, and then they tell me. And so I think once the voice starts talking, once Maggie started talking, it was just kind of listen more than anything else, and try not to force things. But it's a little spooky because you don't really know what's going to pop up, and you've got to trust it.
I love it. I find it so mysterious how, because it happens to me, when I'm writing, even if I'm writing the truth, I see those people talking to me or remember them saying what they said to me. And it's like, I don't know how to describe it, and I dream. Do they talk to you in your dreams too about you trying to figure out how to do something and then all of a sudden it comes to you in a dream? I don't know how. It's something strange with writers. Can't put my finger on. I'm sure somebody's written a book about this, don't you?
I don't get a whole lot in dreams, but what I do is in the morning when I wake up, I kind of lay in bed and I stretch to make sure everything's working and kind of everything
Smart girl.
loosened up, And while I'm just kind of getting awake, I'm just letting my mind wander. And sometimes things pop up. And then, of course, there's the things in the middle of the night that you got to get up and turn the light on and write
Oh
down.
yeah.
They're gone because they will be gone. So I wish I could say that dreams are helpful for me, but they're not so much for me.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Um, um, thank you. I've got a lot of different directions I'm going because your books are eclectic, and that gives me such hope because my ideas are eclectic. That's just the way I think. And I was a journalist too. So my first question is, did you always intend to write fiction? Or because I fell into journalism because I needed to make a living, and always wanted to get back to fiction. It's taken me a very long time, but I just wondered if you just woke up one morning and thought, wow, that would make a great story, and started writing.
Well, I went into journalism to make a living because I had the
Yeah.
vague idea that writers didn't really make a living, although I had no way to test that. So I did go into journalism to make a living, but I always knew I wanted to write. I just didn't know how to go about it. Like I say, I had no mentors or guides or anything. So I started out writing poetry in college. And then after college, I was kept writing poems and some short stories. And then I got an idea for a novel, and I just thought, okay, I'm just going to write a novel on my little manual typewriter. And I
Oh,
did,
yeah.
and it was horrible. And that's long since disappeared into wherever it went, into the garbage, into the landfill. So that's gone. And then I said, well, that wasn't very good. I'll write another one because, and I did. And then the next one I sold, and it's still in print, which makes me very happy because people still say nice things about it. So what more can you ask as a writer?
Oh, yeah. So my second question is, if it's not going to spoil anything, is your Lady Macbeth, does she follow Shakespeare's at all, or have you made her into something else? And you don't have to answer that if it's a spoiler.
Well, I can tell you that all we really know about her is her name,
Wow.
and that she and her husband donated land to a monastery. That's the only time she appears in the record. So she's a blank slate. So I really had fun and enjoyed, kind of digging into who she could have been. That's why I say it's speculative. So that, the arc for Macbeth is not at all what Shakespeare wrote, but we do have his beginning and his ending and when he became king and things like that. So there's material to work with there, but yeah, not with her. So
Wow. That's
That's
wonderful to have a blank slate, isn't it?
yeah.
And Kathy, the book I think that is the closest to what you're looking for or what you were talking about is Robert Olin Butler's From Where We Dream. And it's not necessarily about dreams. It's about how things just come upon you. And they did for
I'll
me.
have to check that out. Robert Olin Butler, I love him.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, he's marvelous.
Yeah, that's great. See, we always get the best idea for other books to read too. And what's your favorite? Who do you like to read,
Oh,
Valerie?
oh, that's always
Oh
the
no,
question that makes me crazy because,
really?
oh yeah, because I read all over the place. Excuse me, I went to the mountains and then I came back down, and now my sinuses are kind of like screaming because yeah, I was up on top of like up on Mount Mitchell, Grandfather Mountain, up in the high, and uh, I do really like to read everything. What I find is recently I don't have much time to read for pleasure. I have huge stacks of books that I've bought to read. And it always seems like I've either got to, I'm working on a review or I'm blurbing or I'm doing research. So I seldom just read for pure, oh, this is marvelous. But I'm trying to do more of that. I started out reading when I was a kid. I read what was in the house, which was a lot of Poe,
Yeah,
Hawthorne, and Mark Twain.
yeah.
And so I read all those things when I was a little kid. I mean, I didn't know what was going on, but I read them anyway. Um, and then I found science fiction, and I love science fiction. And I started with Bradbury and Le Guin and Heinlein and Herbert. So
Well, Heinlein's my favorite. I love
and it was just one of those little racks. Like I say, I came from the country, and there was a Rexall drugstore, and they
Oh
had
yeah.
rack that this jobber came in and put in with like one rank of westerns,
Westerns.
romances, mysteries, science fiction. I can't remember if that was it, but the books that were in there were like the very best. They were, the best books of the time. I mean, so it wasn't sleazy stuff. It was The Left Hand of Darkness and Dune. And so I was starting right out with the biggies. And yeah, I was enchanted. And so I still love science fiction, and I've written a bit of it, and yeah.
Hmm,
And
that's
so
great.
other people I love Margaret Atwood,
Oh yeah.
who writes all over the place. A dear friend and mentor is Fred Chappell, and he
Oh
writes
yeah.
all over the place, Appalachian, science fiction, fantasy, horror. Dagon is, like this horror with the old ones involved. And wow, now I start to go blank. Isn't that great? Lots of poets. What have I just finished reading? What did I just
So
finish
now I'm going to, I know you've done a lot of readings. And so when you go to the bookstores to do readings, do you feel like, oh, I need to buy some books?
Oh,
Do
I
you need-
always don't you? Well, I always buy books. And so the problem is I moved from a little bit bigger house to this house. But the other thing that happened was that I'd been teaching at A&T for 20 some years, and I had 3 giant bookcases. And so I had to merge everything, and there's not room. All my bookcases are full, books are stacked up. I'm still buying books. You know, I love books and I can't give them up. I did sell some, I gave a lot away. I just, part of my library is with Al, who's up there.
Yeah.
So it's
That's-
like, I said, anything you'd like, take it. And so he took, you know, a number of my science fiction titles. If I ever decide I want to read them again, I know where they
Isn't that nice? That's good. And they're saying now, you shouldn't build bookshelves in a house. And I go, what kind of houses doesn't have bookshelves? Remember when the first audio and ebooks started coming out? They said we won't have books anymore, and I go, that will never happen, because they're treasures.
Yeah.
They're just beautiful. I mean, you got.
Oops, Rose,
Oh, yeah, she just.
Frozen.
she'll come back.
She said that she's having trouble with her internet. She said if she goes away, we should just carry on and she will reboot and will rejoin us. So we'll just carry on.
Well, they had a power outage too. She was out power, I think, in her place for, I don't know, 5 days or something like that. One of the most interesting books that I read was Cloud Cuckoo Land. I belong to a book club, and sometimes a person chooses a book, you're not sure if you're going to really like it. And I was really blown away by it. It's by Anthony Doerr, I think, pretty sure.
Yeah, good book.
And the thing that intrigued me was the storyline, talking about having no bookcases, no books. Books survive in all kinds of form. If you're on digital, they're not going to survive. They are gone. And to have things in hand, and that's sort of the story idea, is that a story was created a long time ago, probably about 200 AD or even earlier, and he sort of made part of it up, but it's about this story that keeps going on throughout, and it ends up going way into the future.
It's
It's
a good
a
book.
fantastic book. I mean, and he came I live in Bellingham, Washington, so I'm just south of BC border. And he came to Bellingham and explained how he put that together, because one story is in, I think, what is it, Jeffrey? It's in like 1425. It's in Constantinople. There's another one in Idaho, which is about 1970 or 1980. But the story just keeps being picked up and translated and figured out. But a physical book, that you find books buried in the sand, so I think it's silly not to have bookshelves in your house. You should have some books.
And that's
And
That's it.
digital media, who knows what's going to happen with that? Anybody playing their 8-track tapes lately?
no. Well, I have a question, another question about in the Lonely Backwater. So you talked a lot about research, but for your other writing,
Mhm.
in this, there's a lot of information, the landscape, the botanist aspect of it. Did you do a lot of research for this book, or is it because you just already knew all of that?
Well, the sailing stuff was from sailing. I sailed for 7 or 8 years until arthritis said, no, you're not going to do this anymore. And so that was all in my head. But the botanist stuff, some of that goes back to being a child, because I wandered around, picked up stuff, brought them home, snakes wrapped around my arms, at which my mother then keeled over. But I was always out in the woods, and I love the names of things. I love to know what things are. The Linnaeus thing actually comes from Fred Chappell. He has a story about Linnaeus remembering. It's like this fantastic story. And I heard him read that, and I also saw a puppet show that was made from it, of all things. And so that was kind of in my thoughts. And as I was building this world, which is based on a lake in North Carolina, I don't know, it seemed to me that she became, I'm not sure how it happened that Linnea showed up in there, other than I'm interested in him. And so she finds this book or steals it from this church. And it's like her touchstone. It's how she can see how to organize the world, because he could do it. So she carries around with her everywhere and reads pieces out of it and stuff. So it's kind of somewhat research. I did go and actually go to the University of North Carolina Botany Library and asked them, I found out they had a copy of this book from 1811, the actual copy. And so I went and I said, well, I want to see this book. And they brought it out along with white gloves and a stub of pencil, because they don't trust you to have a pen in there because you might get a mark. So I just paged through this book, and I that's where I knew how it looked and how it smelled and how the type goes through from one page to the other side and all of that. Now you can see it all online. It's all been digitized. You can just go online and see the whole thing, but it's not like holding it. It's not the same thing. And so, yeah, that book became very real for me.
Wow.
I think we're seeing Kathy come back. Or at least I see an image of her, so maybe she's rejoining us.
I think you're on mute, Kathy.
Now, I keep hitting it, but it keeps there. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you now. We
I
waited
don't know
for you.
why it keeps going off, except I was telling her before we were shooting, we've had so many storms, and now Verizon is updating all the system in our area. So I don't know what's going on, but the times of COVID, isn't it interesting? So if you were going to wrap this up with, why everybody should read this book, I'm telling you, it's fun.
Nope, she's gone again.
Oh dear. Well, I guess we'll carry on until she rehooks, so that we don't have a big blank space in the video.
Well, everybody should read the book because it's a very good book.
It
Yeah.
is.
That's a good reason.
Now, do you have at what point do you share your work with do you have readers that you trust?
I have a poetry group that's been going for a very long time, and every one of my poems that have been in the last 2 books went through that poetry group. But for fiction, I don't have a group, but I have readers. Al reads my work, Grace reads my work, Marjorie Hudson, if you know her, I think Patty knows Marjorie. She's read my work and I read hers. And then some other, writer friends who, we just trade manuscripts or openings or whatever. Teresa Frohock is reading mine right now. And so I'm real interested because she writes historical fantasy set during the Spanish Civil War. So that's kind of an interesting period. And so I rely on those people to be honest and tell me, hey, this isn't working, or, another friend, Kevin Rippon, he's absolutely merciless. He holds back nothing.
That's true.
He tells exactly that, but that's really good. I couldn't get the ending right on Backwater. I kept rewriting it. It wasn't right. It wasn't there. And he kept just saying, nope. And finally, just kind of pushed and dragged me over the finish line, by just not accepting what I was doing. He says, no, that's not right. You haven't got it yet. So, I'm reading Al's Metaphor books set in ancient Egypt, and he's reading mine. And, I think it's that community of writers where we're able to call on people to give us, unvarnished views.
Hear me?
There you
I'm
are.
back.
Yep.
I don't know
She's
what's
back.
going on, you guys. I hope what she said was great. I'll hear it later, but it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. But anyway, I just want to tell everybody, be sure and get in the Lonely Backwater. Read it. And she's got a blog up on her page. And if you have any questions, on the Pulpwood Queen page. And the last thing I want to do before we go, which kind of ties in, I've been every week authors send me books, like I hope all of you that are here that have not. And I got 3 today, and they are incredible books. I mean, this is a library, you all. It's The Blanchard Witches of Dahmer County, The Blanchard Witches' Prodigal Daughters, and The Blanchard Witches' Stitches in Time. And there's even more. This author, I talked to him right before. He couldn't come tonight because he had some kind of event, but he won the 2022 National Indie Excellence Award for Paranormal Fiction and the 2022 New York City Big Book Award. He's got a ton of books. He's so nice. I was talking to him right before, and I'll be checking those out. But I get books almost every day now. But to have this box of books come in, but it's right in that kind of paranormal. It's about 3 It reminds me right now. I haven't read it, but I'm thinking like Alice Hoffman, maybe. So we'll see. But I am thrilled that you were here, and Girlfriend Weekend is coming up. And next week, just so you'll know, I had it right here in my hand. Oh, we've got Amy Hill Hearth. She wrote the Delaney sisters, and I don't know if you know that story, but it's about the 2 Black women who grew up. They were 100 years old, and they were New York Times bestseller, made into a film. And this is her new book based on a true story, Silent Came the Monster, about this great shark attack in 1916. So another historical novel. And she's been doing book signings, you guys. Think about this. You're traveling, Janet, in airports. She did one in Newark today, and I forgot where the other one was, but evidently, you think about it, every time you go through an airport, you're always buying books. I do, because I'm going somewhere. So she's up next week, and then we'll be at the end of July. But boy, this month went fast, and I know, Janet, you had a wonderful time. I've been following all your pictures of your travels, and
I had the most amazing people that I met.
She's frozen again.
So generous.
Where were you traveling, Janet?
I went to Shetland first for Shetland Noir, and it was run by Anne Cleves, writes the Vera and the Shetland series. So I was very fortunate to have the Justing affair. I write about Norway and World War II. So it was selected to be on a panel. And of course, people were very interested in an American writing about the Shetland bus. The bus was a bunch of fishing boats that went back and forth between Norway from literally since they were invaded by the Germans until they became submarine chasers. So that's in the story that I write in Justing affair. And I was on a wonderful panel. One of the gentlemen on my panel writes of mysteries set in Florence, and I think 1450 roughly, during the Medici time. You might check him out. It's D.V. Bishop. They're very good. He's working on his 3rd. And then I had another friend from Toronto. She writes speculative, but it was amazing. But the amazing part was the going to the World War II sites. So I went out to where the Shetland bus was in Scalloway, but the owner, one of the main volunteers, his father worked on the buses. So his name is Billy Moore. And he showed me around the museum, which is excellent. I used to work in a museum, so I'm always curious about how people tell stories in their exhibits. And then he said, you're not going anywhere. He drove me all the way to the far end of the island to Lunavaux, which is where it started. It's a private home. So that structure that's in Scotland, the kind of the dour brick things. Well, this dour house that's out the end of this bow is where it all started. And I had a visit with the present day owners. It's just amazing experience. So people are so kind, and I got a write-up in the Shetland Times, which is really thrilling, about my visit out there, So the book is being known now in Scotland and Norway, which really is part of the story. So
when you were on Orkney, did you see any of the World War II sites there, like where they scuttled the ships and they had Italian prisoners of war there? All sorts of interesting stuff up there.
Right, you don't expect that either, because it's so far north. The Shetland's in the middle of nowhere, but you can get over to Bergen It's 178 miles to Bergen. So after I was in Shetland, I went to Bergen to do research to wrap up what I'm just finishing up. Hope to get that off to you as soon as I get the cover and stuff done, Kathy. But the other part there is going to stay with my friends from Trondheim. They're on a beautiful place. It's all an island south of Bergen, and it's a direct shot to Shetland. And they were showing me places where people hid before the boats would come in and take them, take them to Shetland. And from there, you would end up in UK and, freedom. I think one of the most interesting stories I heard was from the sister of my friend who said that, I think it was her father-in-law, he helped with what they called export, and he would get these postcards. And this is in Bumblo, so it's about a 2-hour ferry ride south of Bergen. And it would say like, oh, I had the best time. Can I come? It's like this kind of almost not sexy, because remember, it's 1940, but this sort of stuff, and really what it's saying, be prepared. We got a group of people coming. You have to hide them. And he could never tell his wife, because he said later she would be so proud of him, she'd start talking, and he couldn't talk. So this went on. I think he did it for about a year or so, and he was very good at it. And finally, she found one of the postcards, and she thought he was having an affair. And so he did it a few more times, and she finally said, I can't do this anymore, because my marriage is falling apart. So he stopped. They had a wonderful marriage. And when she passed away, he gathered all the kids together. They're all like 40 somethings. And he said, and they're going like, he said, I have to tell you something. And they're going like, oh, Dad, you're finally going to tell us about this affair you had. And when he told them, they were shocked, because their dad was a hero doing this extremely dangerous, secret thing. The German, the Gestapo, they're looking for you all the time to stop you. But that was one of my favorite stories from there.
Oh, that's great.
The bravery of people is just unreal. And of course, they are really tuned in to Ukraine because they were occupied. Norway knows what it's like to be occupied. So Ukraine is very much on their mind.
What a world. What a world. Well, thank you guys, everybody. I'm sorry it kept kicking me off. I'm on now, but before it goes off again, I'm going to bid you farewell. Thank you, Valerie, so much for joining us. And I look forward to this next book set in Scotland. And everybody be sure and get your copy of In the Lonely Backwater. It's a keeper. All right. Thank you.
Happy, and thank you all. This was fun.
Bye. It's all about the story.
Yes, it is. Bye-bye.
Bye.